This video will discuss chapter 10.5, the Pythagorean Theorem. So this is a theorem that's named after its founder, Pythagoras. And what he found is that in a right triangle, this only works in right triangles, that if you take the sum of the squares of the two legs, it equals the square of the hypotenuse. So in other words, if we name these two legs A and B, then A squared plus B squared will equal C squared. Okay, C squared is, C, I guess, is always the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always the longest leg and is always opposite the right angle. So even if the triangle ends up looking like this is still the hypotenuse, right? No matter how we make this triangle, C is always the longest leg. The mistake a lot of people make is that A does not necessarily have to be the shortest leg, and B does not have to be the second shortest or second longest leg. The only leg that has to be a specific letter is the hypotenuse. It has to be C squared. It does not matter which one you call A and which one you call B. Okay? So this is the theorem we're going to be using today. You may want to pause the video at this time to copy this down into your notes. Alright, so using that theorem, let's take a look at something like this. And so what we're going to end up doing is having to identify what is A and what is B, and then obviously what we are trying to do is find C. And so the typical way that people end up doing this is calling this one A and this one B, though again it wouldn't necessarily matter, and that is because of the commutative property. But so if we call 10A, we're going to say that 10 squared plus 24 squared equals C squared. So this is 100 plus 24 squared is 576 equals C squared. We now get 676 equals C squared. So the mistake a lot of people make at this point is that they believe that this answer then is 676, which it is not. That's what C squared is, so that's a really awful looking 2. Not that that one's that much better. But in order to find what C is, we need to take the square root of this side and the square root of this side. So whatever I do to one side, I would do to the other. The square root of C squared is C. The square root of 676 is 26. So that means that C is going to be 26. All right, so that's one way of solving a problem like this. However, since this is an algebra class, you may not necessarily always be given the two legs and have to find the hypotenuse. And so, if you take a look at a problem like this one, this is my ship that's my sailboat on the sea. Let's hope the waves don't get too rough because this boat doesn't look like it could handle a whole lot. And so, if this is the mass, I know that this is the length, right? This is the height, but I don't necessarily know the diagonal mass. I'm trying to figure out what's the height. So I know that 10 squared plus h squared equals 20 squared, right? So it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I'm calling b h squared because that's what we're calling this, but you could call this b if you want. You could have gone h squared plus 10 squared equals 20 squared. The mistake a lot of people make at this point is they subtract 10 from both sides. They end up getting h squared equals 10 squared, which you cannot do, because remember that exponents come before adding or subtracting in PEMDAS. So we first have to do the exponents. So this is going to be 100 plus h squared equals 400. Okay, and then I need to figure out, I guess let's do this. I'm going to subtract 100 from both sides. And I end up with h squared equals 300. And then what I need to do is figure out the square root of both sides. And so I know that h equals, and this is where I'm going to have to round, I get 17.320 dot dot dot. I'm going to round to the nearest tenth, which means this is approximately 17.3. Okay, so keep in mind that you may not necessarily always be finding c squared. There are times when you may have to find a or b, and so you're going to have to use the Pythagorean theorem in a little bit different way. Okay, and then finally, keep in mind the Pythagorean theorem works with all right triangles. So if you are given 3 leg lengths, You can figure out if the triangle is right, because if the triangle is a right triangle, then the Pythagorean theorem would have to be true. So if this were a right triangle, and I wanted to call this A, this B, and this C, remember C has to be the longest leg, so I know this one is C. It doesn't matter which one is A and which one is B, so this is going to be 9 squared plus 12 squared equals 16 squared. If this is true, then this is a right triangle. I know this is 81 plus 144, and then 16 squared is 256. So the question is 144 plus 81, which equals 225, does not equal 256. So if this statement were true, then it would be a right triangle. But since that statement is not true, is the triangle a right triangle? No, it is not a right triangle. All right, that's all we got for you today on the Pythagorean theorem. Thanks very much for watching the video. Don't forget to do the problems on the bottom of the page. See you in class.